The Race F1 podcast is brought to you by Merill. It's no secret that finances can get complicated. Like me, I'm sure many of you listening will have financial goals. Perhaps it's even saving up for that trip to a Grand Prix far afield. Whatever your goals are, from starting a business to saving for kids' college to getting more stamps in your passport, you want a straightforward path there. But life tends to have other plans, and things get in your way. Merill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merill advisor, you get a personalised plan that can help keep your money in sync with your life. So with the bull at your back, no matter what life brings, you get a clear path forward. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merill. With a dedicated Merill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
Creating really great retail experiences is tough, especially with multiple stores, teams of staff, fulfillment centers, separate workflows. It's a lot. But with Shopify Point of Sale, you can do it all without complexity. Shopify's point of sale system is a unified command center for your retail business. It brings together in-store and online operations, even across 1,000 locations. Imagine being able to guarantee that shopping is just always convenient. Endless aisles, ship to customer, buy online, pickup in store, all made simpler so customers can shop how and where they want, and staff have the tools they need to close the sale every time. And let's face it, acquiring new customers is expensive. With Shopify POS, you can keep existing shoppers coming back to your stores with consistent, tailored experiences and first-party data that give marketing teams a competitive edge. Want more? Check out at shopify.com/theathletic, all lowercase, and learn how to create the best retail experiences without complexity. Shopify.com/theathletic.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and as F1 heads into the final part of the current triple header in Brazil, we answer questions on Sergio Perez's future, or lack of it, Franco Colapinto's RB chances, the title situation, and much more. I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to face another interrogation from the Race Members Club are Scott Mitchell-Malm and special guest Lito Cavalcanti. Lito, welcome back. Great to have you on the podcast from the race in Brazil on YouTube, and a motorsport journalist of many decades standing in Brazil. So yeah, always great weekend, isn't it? The Brazilian Grand Prix.
Yes, it's always a joy to have the Formula One in Brazil. It's a nice weekend, the nicest weekend of the Formula One calendar, mostly because we can get together here and talk to the race public.
Of course, yes. Well, Scott, we're always doing that. But last time we spoke to, some of our public anyway, it was to do a members podcast just before we left from Mexico to come to Brazil. Can't remember where we are because we've had so many flights, but we've been in Brazil for a few hours now. So it almost feels like the same day as when we recorded that members podcast.
Yeah, as we sit here and record this now, we've been in Brazil for not a huge amount longer than we'd spent briefly in Colombia in our stopover via Bogota. So it's an unusual one. And I think you and I have exactly the same experience every single year, which is how is South America this big? Because you leave Mexico and you think, oh, I'm most of the way there now. And it's still a really, really long journey. You sort of think you're just hopping down to the other part of the continent, and then you sort of look at the length of the flights and the durations, and you just think, I don't understand. How is it this far away? I'm sure it's not this far away. But what I love about it is it's one of those races that you travel here, and whether we've come from Mexico, which is still a good sized journey in itself, but even if you just come straight here from Europe, it's one of those where like the destination makes up for it. The race itself, the event actually being here makes up for it. I can think of one or two races where you have a very, very long, difficult journey to get there, and it doesn't always, it's not always worthwhile. But I can't say that about coming to Brazil and Sao Paulo and the Interlagos circuit. It's one of the best circuits to drive into, and race day, the atmosphere it's unique. It's probably a top 3 all season, really, in terms of the feeling that you get.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite races, Brazil, actually. It's got a bit of a reputation, but
that's just because of the dinner with Lito that we have every year, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I remember the first time I came here would have been 22 years ago, I think, for World Series by it was Nissan World Series at that time. So it's the first time I met you in person, having commissioned you for F3 reports and stock cars and that kind of thing. So, but Brazil made a big impression on me then, and it's always been a favourite race. But we've got a load of questions from the Race Members Club to work through here. So we'll start off now. A topic we've talked about a lot, but we have to talk about it again, and loads of questions. So I'm going to, Lito, throw a question to you first, which is kind of an amalgam of 5 questions, but they all come down to about the same thing. Ollie Barker asks, how likely is it Red Bull are going to keep Perez for 2025? Tyler Hall asks if Sergio Perez could take any positives from the Mexican Grand Prix. Chris Casbianca asks, when does enough become enough for Red Bull? Surely losing second in the Constructors' Championship is the final nail in the coffin. Michael Morwood asks how much the Mexican Grand Prix ramps up the pressure on Perez, and Ethan Fish says, how can Red Bull justify keeping the underperforming Perez? So it all comes down to, is Sergio Perez's time coming to an end at Red Bull?
Yes, I think it's something that he just can't avoid. He's been speaking that he's going to be there at the same place next season, but his races say another thing. He was out in Q1. Okay, there was a problem with the brakes of the car. But when you see the papers, it only figures there. Sergio Perez was out in Q1. And it comes on after a lot of bad races we had this season. He's not helping the team in the Constructors' Championship. He's not doing what he was supposed to do. So I really don't know until when Red Bull is going to keep him. But I can't see him staying one more season with Red Bull.
We had a conversation on the Sunday in Mexico, didn't we, Ed? And I might catch you slightly unawares with this, but I remember you scribbled it down earnestly in your notebook because we were so caught up in when did this last happen? We had to do the research. We were looking at when the last time the driver that won the World Championship, their teammate, finished as low as Perez is in the championship. Now he's 8th, isn't he? And you had to go back quite far, didn't you, to actually get the answer?
I think it was 1983, Nelson Piquet, when Riccardo Patrese was his teammate, and he only finished a few races.
There was because there's an asterisk against 94, isn't there? There was
because that's a combination of Verstappen, Herbert, and JJ Leto. So I mean, they didn't get anywhere near finishing that, even if you added them together. But there is an asterisk there.
And the reason I say it, and so we got caught up in it, is not out of excitement or joy, because I don't think anybody really. I guess every driver in F1 will have enemies to a degree, but I don't really think anyone's taken any joy out of what Checo's going through and the situation he finds himself in. I think I said this the other day, but he's a better driver than he's been made to look this year. He's a better driver than he looked at the Mexican Grand Prix. And, there was a time where he was almost the perfect option for Red Bull, and that was in that year or two after they dropped Gasly and Albon and it all worked. But it's almost, in a way, it's not his fault that Red Bull have kept him beyond what purpose he served at that team. And the reason for researching that statistic that we just talked about was because it just puts in perspective just how much of a disparity there is between the two Red Bull drivers this season, and why Red Bull have had car problems, they've had off-track issues this year, but the primary contribution to them failing to win the Constructors' Championship is Perez's performance versus Verstappen. And Christian Horner said on Sunday in Mexico about as strong a statement as he will ever make, I think, on the record, when he said there comes a point where you can't do any more for your driver, talking about how much they've tried to help Checo. And he wasn't saying that Checo's going to be replaced before the end of this season, but he didn't rule that out. And he was not speaking like a team boss who's prepared to keep this guy for next year. So it does feel like the end is drawing closer.
Yeah, his position, I think, is becoming untenable. And we always knew this would come when Red Bull are less competitive, and he costs them places in the championship, possibly even entirely costing them the championship. But I'd be interested to ask Lito what you make of the the broader coverage of Perez, because we often get told, the British media just being dismissive of this part of the world. And I appreciate considering Mexico to be very local.
Yeah, don't do a helmet
stretching
Marco.
a point. But do you think there's anything in that? What do you think of the wider treatment? You can criticise us if you like, but given you are Brazilian, I thought it would be interesting to get your perspective, because I know how much you read from all over the world.
Well, I think that there's no way that people can help, media, whoever can help Sergio Perez when he's not helping himself. He goes out in Q1, he puts his car in the wrong place in the start. He made a real good start, and he wasted it with a bad positioning on the grid. And when he comes to pass Lawson, I think he was not respectful. I think he tried too hard, and he kind of ignored that Lawson was there. But Lawson is the guy that's fighting to take his place. I think he should have thought, well, this guy's not going to give me a free pass. I think he's not helping himself. But anyway, he was loved 2 years ago down here in South America. Everybody liked him. Okay, he was not a good qualifier, but he rises up on Sundays. He's a good racer. His racecraft is really good, but it's not anymore.
There must be a bit of a mixed feeling amongst Brazilian fans, because obviously we've talked about this on this podcast before, and when we've been here with you, about how popular Lewis Hamilton is here, and obviously Checo was a prime thorn in Hamilton's side in 2021 when he lost it. So, but obviously at the same time, Checo I think he has a good relationship. He and his family have a good relationship with Lewis. So I wonder, because we saw in Mexico last weekend how the Mexican fans really rallied behind basically all of the Spanish-speaking drivers. It wasn't just Checo.
The cheer when Sainz got pole position on his slowdown lap from the stadium was enormous.
But even like Franco Colapinto, who has obviously picked up a good amount of momentum and support in the early stages of this unexpected chance he's getting in Formula One. So there's a bit of buzz and excitement around him, and I can understand that. Even he was saying that he was so surprised by the reaction that he'd got in Mexico. What's it like the other way around? So here, Checo, for example, obviously being from, broadly speaking, this part of the world, but also Spanish speakers like Alonso and Sainz, it's slightly different, isn't it? Because obviously in Mexico, they're responding to, I guess, people that speak the same language. Here, Brazilian, Portuguese, it's slightly different. So do they feel the love the same way when they come here?
Well, not for the language, because Brazil is the only country in Latin America that doesn't speak Spanish, speaks Portuguese. But anyway, there's a contact between all these peoples. And now there's something like Portuñol, that's a mix of Portuguese and Spanish. And it's almost becoming an official idiom. But that's not for this. That's because of the American bond, the continental bond. It's always been antagonic to European when it comes down to sports, to football, to racing, everything like that. It's something like us against them. And so Brazilian call Argentinians, and mostly Argentinians, hermanos. Hermanos is brothers in Spanish, Although these brothers might be sometimes, mostly when it comes to sports, brothers like Cain and Abel, not a very lovely relationship. But anyway, they are our brothers. They really are our brothers.
Checo should get a good response this weekend. Then I would imagine he'll have a little bit of friendly backing coming into this weekend. I think he needs it after Mexico, because to go through that at your home race is obviously particularly brutal. And he had clearly handled it or taken it very badly, because I did feel that response, Lito, you mentioned that the way he drove against Lawson was probably not showing a huge amount of respect. But I think the way he talked about Lawson afterwards was quite bitter. I don't really think Checo gave Lawson enough respect afterwards. Obviously, he accused Lawson of being disrespectful, not having the right attitude towards F1, and saying, he'd clashed with Fernando in Austin and hadn't learned from that. And it felt a little bit like I don't know how much he meant it. It felt a little bit like the whole, the scale of the expectation and the disappointment weighed on Checo very heavily on Sunday evening. So it was a weekend overall in which I think he wants to forget about it and move on. So maybe, he's not on home soil anymore, but maybe staying on the same continent can help him a little bit.
If he makes an unusual old, if he brings back his usual old style of the fighter, of the driver that never accepts being overtaken, that will fight back corner after corner, people will cheer for him, But if he comes in the way he was driving in Mexico, they will boo him.
I do fear that he may be just needing to get out of that Red Bull environment, but it'd be great if he could have a bit of a revival, because he has got ability, and I think a lot of people would like to see that happening. Scott, on a related note, JP says, despite the finishing position for Liam Lawson in Mexico, does that weekend further increase his chances at Red Bull and also Franco Colapinto to RB?
Yeah, I think if I was to gamble on it now, I would say that's the change that will be made. I think Lawson will go in to Red Bull Racing alongside Max Verstappen, and I think I don't think they'll do everything they can to get hold of Franco Colapinto, but I think they will seriously explore it and go to a certain point to get him, because he fills a gap. That combination fills a gap in the driver problem.
And of course, doing everything they can, that's all about the amount of money, isn't it?
Yeah, because Colapinto has a long-term Williams contract that he was locked into as a condition of taking Logan Sargent's seat for the rest of this year. So it's a very clever play by Williams and James Vowles, because I don't think anybody, even the people at Williams that rated Colapinto highly, thought he would come into F1 and make the impact that he has made. But you protect yourself against the best possible scenario. And the best possible scenario was Franco coming in and being so good that someone else wants to sign him. So in that situation, if you're Williams, you go, okay, well, if that happens, we're happy to let him go, but it needs to be at the right price. That's the situation they're in now. So Red Bull are interested. There've been some initial conversations. It comes down to whether Red Bull want to seriously pursue it. And then if that absolutely happens, okay, what is the price? Because there will be a price, and I think James Vowles is open to it, but he's not going to say in public, oh, well, of course we'll let him go, because then the price drops. And Red Bull aren't going to say in public, we must have this guy, he's the future of our team, because then the price goes up massively. So there's kind of like a private war going on at the moment. They're trying to and when one of the parties involved has Helmut Marko on side, suddenly that doesn't stay very private and actually becomes talked about quite a lot. So it's very interesting. But I do think the prospect of Lawson going in at Red Bull Racing is growing. And that's not conditional on them getting Colapinto. They'll sort out the second team however they need to sort it out. The priority will be making sure that they've got the right driver alongside Verstappen. The early evidence is suggesting that could be Lawson over Perez, even if Lawson's not, ends up not being the perfect candidate himself. So that's priority number one. Then priority number two is if Lawson steps up, who goes in there? I think they'll go after Colapinto, but they've also got Isaac Hadjar doing a good job in F2. And even though Red Bull, I believe, don't think he's ready for F1, if they don't have anyone else, that's why you have a junior program, isn't it?
And in your capacity as ambassador for the region, Lito, how's Franco Colapinto gone down in this part of the world with what he's done?
Well, he's very well seen here, because he's doing miracles for what he was. From where he was and how he was doing in Formula 2, and to the point that now Formula 2 is seen with some reserve, because how can such a driver that steps for the first time in Formula 1 and does what he's doing, how can be only sixth in Formula 2? And then, they took a look at Formula 2 and saw what it really is. It was necessary. Anyway, he's been seen here as a real good prospect, and maybe the best Argentinian since Fangio here. People is rating him, and I'm one of them, who's rating him maybe higher than Carlos Reutemann.
Even better than Gaston Mazzucane.
Oh, I wouldn't go that far.
There was in Mexico on the Thursday. It links into this. I asked Franco about pretty much exactly that. Drivers that what can you show in Formula One that you couldn't show in Formula 2 beyond the obvious of how quick can you go in a Formula 1 car? Because we talked about this, didn't we, Ed, in advance of Mexico. Someone asked how, in one of the members' questions, how much do we rate Colapinto? Do we think he's a future world champion? And I think when we were discussing that, I'd said that you do have a situation where you step up from F2 to F1, and F1 asks so much of a driver, so many different things of a driver, that you can also bring out something in a driver in F1 that maybe wasn't obvious in F2, and vice versa. Some drivers look fantastic in Formula 3 or Formula 2, and then you get to the pressure of F1, the technical demand of F1, the size and scale of everything, and you struggle. And Colapinto, I think, clearly a very good driver in junior categories, very impressive. I think he's always done a good job with maybe not always the best opportunity. So he's always been a driver, it seems, who takes an opportunity that's given and then does a good job with it, even if he doesn't have the most testing, the best team, whatever. So clearly a capable driver. But as Lito was mentioning, not a driver who everybody in the F1 bubble was looking at and going, he's clearly a superstar. So just very quickly, I'll read out what Franco said when I asked him, from your experience driving the F2 car and the F1 car, what can you show in F1 that's a bit harder to show yourself in junior categories? And he said, I think Formula One is not only about driving, it's also about the show of the track, the show at the track, about what you can bring to the team, the fans, the people, all the support I have right now. It's something important and something you don't see very often, but often you can show it a lot more in F1. Then you also have more time on the track, you have more free time, you have more laps with the team, you're able to work with many more people, you're extremely focused on one target. And you're spending a lot of hours working on the little details that in Formula 2 you cannot. That answer went on a little bit longer, but I think that bit, that just really captures the bigger picture stuff. And I think Colapinto has stepped into F1 and handled that really, really well.
Yeah, that's always absolutely vital, those sorts of qualities.
There's a thing, too, that Brazilian drivers talk a lot about it, and I think it also applies to Argentinian drivers or whoever comes from out of Europe. They go there. It's very far from home, After each race, they don't get back to home to their families. They fight hard during a whole season, and then when comes an opportunity like Formula One or something like that, a good opportunity for them, they go for it with all their guts. They really, really try hard because it's been tough for them to reach that moment.
I actually see quite a few parallels between Colapinto and Lawson, in another driver who to chase that F1 dream and that motorsport career has to move away from home. Can't just stay in New Zealand and think that you can progress all the way through the ranks from there. But more just in terms of how they've dealt with that in their junior career, the fact that they've been able to make that transition and then perform, but also crucially, they've got better the bigger the opportunities they've had as they've stepped up the ranks. And one of the things I believe that Red Bull thinks of Lawson is, maybe there's a small question mark there about ultimately how fast are you? Are you an absolute, mega star in terms of your ultimate raw pace? Not sure Lawson is, but the way that Red Bull view him is that he's very close. He's clearly a very fast driver, but he has so much of everything else. Confidence without going into self-destructive arrogance. Really, really high work ethic. Good technical understanding. And it's very early days to say that about either of them in F1 because they have actually sort of similar length F1 careers at this point. But you're starting to see little bits of that in Colapinto as well. So that's kind of similar kind of trend line in terms of how you develop as a driver, how you grab your opportunities. And like I said, those other various elements to your game that make you maybe a little bit better than people would, almost a little bit I think the absolute gold standard of that in F1 is Carlos Sainz, a driver who has compared so well against Lando Norris, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc. And I think most people in the F1 paddock would say he's very, very quick, but is he, on the exact same 100th of a second of a Leclerc or a Verstappen? Most people would say no, but everything else about his game is so top standard. He is a fantastic Formula One driver, and I wonder if that's the kind of band of driver that a Lawson or a Colapinto would be in.
What I think has helped Colapinto in a slightly counterintuitive way is he hasn't had vast amounts of money behind him in his career. Now, that makes it very, very hard to get to F1. It's a miracle he's made it to F1. But what it does is it gives you that you've got to take every opportunity. You don't have infinite testing. Every single time you get in the car, you've got to do it. He has definitely got that mentality. I'm told he's long had a saying that you never know when it's your last race. So you've got to deliver, not make excuses. And there are drivers who are more psychologically brittle, who don't buy into that or can't buy into that. And it's difficult. It's really hard. But he's got that mentality, and that's what I like about Colapinto.
This episode is brought to you by Merill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merill. With a dedicated Merill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10, place your first bet on any game, and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
Well, we're going to stick with the world of Red Bull drivers for the next few questions. The first one I'll take from Darren Donald. Did Yuki Tsunoda's crash in Q2 in Mexico end any slim hopes he had for a Red Bull race seat in 2025? I don't think it did, because I don't think there were any slim hopes. Yes, he's a contender because he's on their books. They don't think he's mentally robust enough and has the emotional control to do it. Tsunoda's chance purely comes from him being absolutely fantastic, showing enormous robustness, and all that did, I think, was just confirm where they see him. Yes, he's going to test that Red Bull at the end of the year, but that's for Honda more than for Red Bull. A lot of ability in Tsunoda, but that's very much where Red Bull see him, and that's why he's not considered by them to be a serious contender. Lito, a question from Nabil. Is Red Bull now out of the Constructors' Championship fight? It now seems like they might have their driver win the Drivers' Championship, with the team finishing third. 54 points down they are now, Red Bull.
Yes, I think it's done. I think there's no way Red Bull can get back to a stronger position in Constructors. But at least they have the Drivers' Championship. I think it's done too. I think you have one only fight in the both championships, and it's between McLaren and Ferrari. And Ferrari is getting closer, but they have to fight that strong end of stints of McLaren.
Lito, could you imagine 4 or 5 races into the season suggesting that the Constructors' Championship fight would come down to McLaren versus Red Bull?
No, it's unbelievable, the situation we are facing now. It's not only this 5 or 6 races into the season. Take a look at the last 2 years. It was such a dominant team, and they got so lost. I don't have another word.
Yeah, so it's been a massive decline over the last 12 months. Obviously, I said McLaren versus Red Bull there, and I meant McLaren versus Ferrari. That's how ingrained the idea that Red Bull should be fighting for the championship is in my head.
Exactly. And the final question for this part from Brandon H. Could any of the delay in Sauber announcing a second driver have to do with seeing what Red Bull does with Sergio Perez? He seems like he'd make a good option in a team like that for 2025. Also, what happened to Ayumu Iwasa? He seemed pretty highly rated by Red Bull last year, but doesn't get any mention as an option any longer.
Well, Iwasa, I think, is kind of a little bit in the same camp as Tsunoda in that his primary back is Honda. He's part of the Red Bull program, but Honda is the main supporter there. And there was quite a lot of interest in Iwasa from Red Bull's side. They rated him quite highly, but now that he's been parked in Japan, part of me feels that they must have seen something in private, either in, simulator work or F2 feedback from his team or whatever, that or because he has had a limited amount of F1 running, hasn't he? Was he in the RB in Japan this year in FP1, for example? Was that his debut, or had he been out last year as well?
I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, I definitely remember him doing that. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did a couple of test outings, didn't he? Was it just one? I'm trying to remember.
But it's the kind of thing that
Teams, just Japan. Yeah.
Teams put so much emphasis on what you do now in the F1 car or in the F1 environment, whether that's on the simulator, in testing old cars, not so much the FP1 outings because Friday practice is so limited, but it dwarfs what you do in Formula 2. And I think Iwasa has needed to go out and dominate in Formula 2, for example, last season to really sort of force his way into the reckoning. And that didn't happen. As for the first part of the question, I don't think what Sauber and Audi do has any bearing on this, because I don't see them going for Perez. If they're going to go with experience, they'll keep Bottas, because Valtteri Bottas is, in a similar stage as Perez is in their career, but Valtteri is a faster driver. In the ideal scenarios, Sauber would sign Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez, and Valtteri would qualify the car on Saturday, and then they'd give the car to Checo on Sundays. Because I think if you've got Checo performing at his best, that could be a real asset for a team like Sauber. But I don't think you need to go there if you've got Bottas. So Sauber, it's a choice between youth and experience. And if it's experience, it's Bottas. And if it's youth, ironically, given everything we've spoken about him, they've had some conversations with the Colapinto camp, but it's not Colapinto, it's Gabriel Bortoleto, who is another sudden South American hope that has, and I say sudden in the sense that he's now on the periphery of F1 and being talked about for a race seat. So that'll be the direction that they go in there if they go with youth.
I imagine there's quite a bit of excitement about Bortoleto here. A bit closer to home than what we've been talking about before in Mexico.
Yeah, Bortoleto now is the name. It's the name of the man of the moment. Everybody's talking about him, and because, he's done very well in Formula 3. Champion as a rookie, and now he's fighting for the championship. He's leading the Formula 2 championship as a rookie, and as Fernando says, he's the only real rookie. Well, if you can call a rookie someone who has the advices of Fernando Alonso, anyway, I think it makes up for not having tested before. But anyway, when it comes down to Sauber's choice, I don't know why they would go for Perez or even for Bottas when they have Hülkenberg. Maybe it would be if they had the ability to go back in time. Maybe they had the right choice would be between Bottas and Hülkenberg, one or the other. But because now they have an experienced driver. And now I think that the right mix would be a young driver, Colapinto or Bortoleto, I don't know. It's up to them. But anyway, Bortoleto is a strong name now here. So everywhere you go, everywhere anywhere you find a photo of him, something about him.
It's really good to see not just from a Brazilian perspective with Bortoleto, but also what we talked about with Colapinto, for example, arriving on the scene. It's fantastic for Formula One and just also for motorsport as a whole to see these drivers getting these opportunities and emerging, because obviously there are certain nations that went underrepresented in F1 for a very long time, and some of the countries that have had, some of F1's greatest drivers that then suddenly go years without having that representation on the grid. And you could tell, you see with Checo, for example, in Mexico, how big a deal that is. You can hear it in Colapinto's voice, and you can see it on his face when he talks about representing South America and obviously Argentina specifically, how much that means to him. And I think if someone like Bortoleto was to be able to get on the grid, it would be a big deal here, because it looked like there might be a chance with Felipe Drugovich. That obviously hasn't happened for various reasons. I tried to get him to talk about that a little bit in Mexico last week. He had a media session after his FP1 outing. He didn't really want to talk about why he hasn't been able to get on the F1 grid. I think there's obviously a sense of disappointment and frustration that he's done everything he can in terms of winning Formula 2 and trying to impress in the limited outings Aston Martin are giving him. You can't get anywhere. I think it would be a big deal for one of those young drivers to get on the grid full time, because ultimately what Colapinto's done is great, but if this ends up being the sum total of his F1 career, how much has that really achieved? You need these young drivers to get into Formula 1 to show that the World Championship takes them seriously and there actually is a pathway. Bortoleto, as an example, I first came across not him personally, but the name and the family when his older brother was racing in the UK. He did the BRDCF4 Winter Series for the Petroball team, I think it was, the Brazilian team at the time.
Yes.
I remember the livery in the Brazilian flag style. That was quite a cool initiative, but that was very short-lived as well. That's what happens. Lito said earlier about the drivers from this part of the world that go over to a massively European-centric racing model. They give up a lot. And how do you commit to doing that as a young driver if you don't see representation at the top? What's the point if you look at that and go, well, they'll never accept me? If Drugovich was the last driver, for example, to try, that is a massive red flag to any young drivers here, because you just go, well, I could win Formula 2 and they won't take me seriously. But then you see Colapinto, maybe Bortoleto do it, and it just sends a much better message.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be important for Brazil to get a driver back on the grid, hasn't it? 'Cause it's been a while now, and that interest will go elsewhere gradually. And I think actually everyone wants to see Brazilian drivers because there's such an affinity, certainly in the UK, for Brazilian drivers because of the history of Fittipaldi, Senna. There's a long history and loads of other names. So I'm a bit frustrated that it could be Sauber he could end up with, because I'm a bit concerned about a young driver going into that team, which is why I've been quite pro them having Bottas. But I want to see Bortoleto on the grid, and I want to see Colapinto on the grid as well. So I just feel like that's a really difficult thing to go for. And if you're Bortoleto, do you want to force your way out of McLaren, albeit with no race drive and no immediate chance for a race drive, because Norris and Piastri have got reasonably long-term deals? But is that the right place to be doing it? Could that risk ruining his career just by being in a team that is a bit all over the place at the moment?
Yes, I'm also afraid about it. I think it's not the right place to go. I think it's not the right start for a Formula One career. We had drivers like Lucas de Grassi that became world champion in Formula E, and also an outstanding driver. He started in the wrong teams and he went nowhere. You had almost the same. I wouldn't rate him so highly as Lucas, but also a very good driver. Bruno Senna was not in the right team, in the right moments, and then they went nowhere. I really, to myself, I think that Gabriel shouldn't go to Sauber, because there's a new phenomenon called social media. And social media, it's everywhere, and it's not the most cultural ambient, and people knows nothing about Formula One. And mostly when you talk to Brazilians, there's only one respectable result: victory, first place. Second place is nothing.
And we've just come out of a weekend where Valtteri Bottas did a great job and finished 14th.
That's it. And so what can he do with a Sauber? But after one or two races, and of course he won't win those races, people is going to start to smash him down on the ground. And I don't know what it can mean to his career.
It's very, very difficult, isn't it? Because there's obviously the need to get on the grid and show you can do it. And that's the thing that everyone fights for. I don't know what you think, Scott. I just feel that any other place other than Sauber, you think that would be great. And they could turn things around as Audi, etc. But also, we know that if Bortoleto were to go to Sauber, it wouldn't just be a loan. They'd want him for the long term to develop him and be Audi's driver for the long term. So Bortoleto would have to back that horse. Now, it was easy for Colapinto to take the Williams drive because he had no other path into F1. Bortoleto maybe does, but he doesn't know. So what would you be thinking if you were advising him?
Well, but also Colapinto had the chance to get on the grid with a better car. If we're not talking about Colapinto the way we're talking about him, and he doesn't have the career opportunities he has if he gets in a Williams that performs like the Sauber. It's if Colapinto's jumped in, the performance level Williams had 3 or 4 years ago, he's doing nothing for his career. That he'll come in. You might look at that and go, oh, he's done all right against Albon. He's sort of been about there pace wise, but he'll be finishing 14th, 15th, 16th. No one's going to care, and that's kind of the problem. It's slightly different in the fact that if Bortoleto does this, it would be a full-time drive, so it would be a bigger, a longer chance to kind of prove yourself, and hopefully you get, the team on the right trajectory in that time. And obviously with the transformation in 2026 to it becoming Audi, there's an affiliation there that is a huge deal and could pay off. So it's not exactly the same situation, but for you to take that chance that, okay, this is my way of getting on the grid and proving myself, you have to at least have the machinery to do something with. He doesn't. I completely understand what Lito's saying about, like, if you're not a winner, ultimately everybody turns on you at some point. But you at least need to be able to fight. You need to be able to show something. Fernando Alonso's first season in Formula One will always be the gold standard of that, right? What he did fighting gravity constantly in the Minardi, because if he'd been dead last or second to last every weekend, you would still look at that differently.
Well, if you'd like a good example, our colleague Mark Hughes, he used to do the driver ratings around that sort of time, and he was getting pilloried for his coverage of Alonso in 2001 because Alonso had finished 15th, and Mark would say that absolutely phenomenal weekend, and people say, oh, he's at the back, doesn't matter. And I had a similar thing, for example, with George Russell in his first Williams season, when he was in a terrible car that was miles off the back, but you could see he was doing well, but it just looks ridiculous to most people, and understandably so. So it's and I say that not to say everyone's stupid, and we see that. It's only if you're there going through the granular detail that you understand that. And who's got the time to do that? The average, the engaged fan hasn't got time to do that with their lives, let alone sort of the sort of broader world. So it's a savage sort of world in terms of how people are judged.
But also when you look at those drivers that we talk about there, so Alonso in 2001, Russell in 2019, those are drivers that have taken the opportunity that's right there in front of them. That is the tricky thing for Bortoleto. You just have that temptation of, I could get on the grid right now in this situation, or do I wait and maybe get a much better chance, but also that chance might never arise. It's not an enviable position.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because Russell was on Mercedes books, he was on loan. Alonso was in Flavio Briatore's orbit, so that was a step towards the Renault drive. Bortoleto would have to cut ties with McLaren unless Sauber changed their mind and were willing to take a loan, which I don't think they are. Then there's no way back. You are hitching yourself to the Audi wagon. There's not mess around at the back and learn a bit, and we know you're good and we'll put you in the car. So it's tough, isn't it, Lito? Because let's just say hypothetically there's a deal there for Bortoleto and he says, no, that team's rubbish, I'm going to look stupid. That's a sensible decision. But tomorrow might never come. There may never be an opportunity.
Yeah, I think Depends on the condition each one has. You look, Colapinto has already proved that he can survive in Formula One, so he can face a time in Sauber, because he has already shown in Formula One how capable he is, how fast he is, how reliable he is. Bortoleto never, he drove once one Formula One car. Only once, an old McLaren car. He did all right for what they say, but we never know. We were not there. People was not there. Only the McLaren team. And the McLaren team would always say he's done good. He's done well. But anyway, I think that Bortoleto has a different structure behind him from Colapinto, from many of these guys. And I think he can wait, and I think he should wait, because the drivers that are in the ahead of him, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, they won't be best friends next season. I really don't believe they are going to be sharing McLaren in 26.
I think so. It's very hard to caution a young driver against taking an F1 seat if one is there with Sauber. But we are potentially 6 or 7 months away from another fascinating driver market with 2026 around the corner. What happens to Max Verstappen at Red Bull? If Max leaves Red Bull, it's Armageddon in the driver market, because Red Bull will need to get an A-lister in. And my suspicion is they will go for either Oscar Piastri or Carlos Sainz. That would be my gut feeling. I think they might go, logically, taking George Russell makes sense. And the only way that I think they lose Verstappen is if Verstappen goes to Mercedes and then Russell's on the market. But the point is that there are changes potentially coming, and F1's pecking order could change in 2026 with the new rules, that there really could be a volatile situation coming up in 12 months in which being a free agent or being a highly rated young driver could actually be your ticket onto the grid. Even if it isn't straight in at McLaren, he might be better served staying there, being a reserve driver next year, still doing that, the TPC testing in old cars. And if a seat opens up at McLaren, if something happens at Williams, if something happens anywhere, then there's an opportunity to strike. That might be the better play, but he'll have, with Alonso being in the Alonso camp, he will have advice from someone who knows the ins and outs of F1 a lot better than we do. At the same time, he'll be being advised by someone who hasn't always made the best career moves at the right time. And
there is a point too. On the other hand, everything we talked about Bortoleto, saying no to a Formula One team is quite a dangerous position. Quite dangerous. So I really don't know, and thanks God I'm not the one who should decide Bortoleto's reply, because it's hard.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see from what's gone on there. Look at Zhou Guanyu. Now, Zhou Guanyu, as I've always said, I don't think he's stunningly fast, but he's a very competent driver. He's looked abysmal this year. There's been an enormous amount going wrong there, a lot of which isn't talked about, and he's been made to look worse than he is. I don't think he's made a compelling case to have a longer than 3-year Grand Prix career, certainly, but that shows how bad it can look. The kind of a sort of competently solid driver has been made to look absolutely abysmal. So, yeah, very, very difficult choice to be made there.
This episode is supported by Merill. With a dedicated Merill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Thursday Night Football is on, and it's only on Prime Video.
All the way for the touchdown.
This week, it's a Halloween treat as the Houston Texans take on the New York Jets.
What a catch.
Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern with TNF Tonight, presented by Verizon. Not a Prime member? Sign up for a 30-day free trial to stream the game. It's the Texans and the Jets, Thursday at 7, only on Prime Video. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details.
This episode is supported by Merill. With a dedicated Merill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Well, remember, all of these questions have come from the Race Members Club. If you'd like to get involved with the Race Members Club, have question-asking privileges for this podcast, exclusive members-only podcasts as well. Me and Scott did an exclusive short question blast before we left here, talking about all sorts of topics: the Max Verstappen versus Lando Norris, the psychology of that title fight, penalties, Carlos Sainz's Mexican Grand Prix weekend, and whether it was the most complete of his career. Adrian Newey's impact on leaving Red Bull, and even the thorny issue of driver ratings. So we do regular podcasts like that. I also do book club podcasts where I interview authors about new books that have come out. There's loads of stuff you get. Click the link in the episode description to find out more about that, or head to Patreon, search for The Race, and you'll find out how to sign up. Right, some more questions. Lito, Adam Barton says, with no title since 2008 for Ferrari or McLaren, and 1999 for the Constructors' Championship, obviously for Ferrari, who would the Constructors' Championship mean more to, Ferrari or McLaren?
I think Ferrari. Anything is bigger for Ferrari than for other teams because of the Italian people, the Italian passion. I think for Ferrari because of this. But if you compare only the teams, I think it's the same for both of them. They are being kind of reborn.
The prospect of winning a title for Ferrari is huge, given the constant, in the last 10 years or so, the constant, like, not near misses. They never got super close, but the number of like false dawns at the start of a season. How many times in the last 10 years, in the hybrid era pretty much, have we seen Ferrari start a year where you think, oh, maybe this is the year they get it together, and then by race 5 or race 10 or the summer break, they're nowhere in the picture again because the development has under-delivered. They've made too many strategy errors. The reliability's been all over the place. The drivers have made mistakes. There have been so many things that have undermined that team over time, and it feels like it might all be coming together now. One thing that's really interesting is how much it's coming together in terms of them starting to get absolutely the most out of everything, or are they getting closer to the maximum than everybody else? Because obviously Red Bull, we know they're fighting this fight one-handed a lot of the time. McLaren, they've made mistakes this year. The last couple of races which have allowed Ferrari to, score really big and catch up is Oscar Piastri's just had a couple of slightly weaker weekends compared to how good he's been at other times this year. So then that question mark is, all right, okay, if all of these teams are absolutely 100% at their best, is Ferrari not still behind the other two? But it almost doesn't matter in the Constructors' Championship. If they can get this over the line, having developed their way out of a big problem mid-season, with the driver lineup that they have simply just maximising everything more often than everybody else, that will be a massive celebration for the team and for the Tifosi because of the extent of the drought that they have.
And I think it also has a potentially just that slightly bigger impact for Ferrari. It'd be huge for either team, but Ferrari has got the hopes of a whole nation on its shoulders, the Tifosi, the media, etc. So I think it would be such a huge deal. It'd be a big deal for McLaren, but massive deal for Ferrari. So I'm inclined to agree with you on that, Lito.
And I think there's an interesting point. Both of them have new bosses, and they must firm themselves as the men who are going to take the team from these dark ages, from these dark times.
Yeah, very much so. Significant for Andrea Stella or Fred Vasseur. Scott, a question from George Vandini. If you had to guess, of the last 4 races, which tracks will favour McLaren or Ferrari in the championship battle, how would you judge it?
Well, I would defer to somebody who has more knowledge of the matter than I do, and that is the aforementioned Andrea Stella, McLaren team principal, because he, in a slightly surprisingly honest move, basically addressed this very question in Mexico and thinks that McLaren will be better suited in Qatar, Ferrari will be better suited to Las Vegas, and I think Brazil and Abu Dhabi will be a bit of a toss-up between the two of them. So who am I to question Andrea Stella's judgment? And it seems logical because obviously we know that car, I mean, some people in Ferrari, like Jock Clear, don't like the suggestion that car's not good in the high speed, but it's certainly weaker in high speed than rivals. So Qatar, which is predominantly well, it's almost it's entirely medium and high speed corners, isn't it? There isn't the slowest corner there is third gear, isn't it, in Qatar? So it's very much not a low speed track. So that's why that one will probably be weaker for Ferrari, and it will suit McLaren, and it will probably also suit Red Bull better as well. Here is very tricky to judge. McLaren were good here last year. It was one of their stronger weekends as part of that second half surge against Red Bull. So my gut feeling is McLaren, but the Ferrari's working in a good range. I think we go to Vegas, where it'll be low grip again, but that unique layout, they were very strong there last year. I'd expect that to suit Ferrari better. And then Abu Dhabi, I'm not even going to try, because Abu Dhabi, it feels like even in the most dominant seasons, we've got to the end and suddenly like Red Bull have beaten Mercedes. So I don't think it's a very good idea to try and guess what's going to happen there.
Yeah, Stella was sort of fairly upbeat about Abu Dhabi. I think probably Brazil and Vegas will be quite important ones for Ferrari. But if it kind of goes with form, and let's say Interlagos is a toss-up, Vegas goes to Ferrari, Qatar goes to McLaren. Then you go to this Abu Dhabi finale where maybe if you just put money on McLaren on that one, but it's so tight, it could be absolutely anything. Next, a question that's an amalgamation of three from Stephen Long, Aaron Riley and Thomas Knights that I'll take. Where did Ferrari's performance come from? Is it overall pace, or have the circuit characteristics of the last two tracks played into Ferrari's hands? And how did Ferrari overcome its Mexico City problems with the smaller turbo of previous years? Well, on the turbo side, they've still got the smaller turbo, so you have to work it harder, because obviously it's altitude, you've got to compress the air more aggressively, so you just have to work it harder to get the same effects you do, say, on a Honda, and that's still the case, but it just isn't such a problem simply because they've got other all-round strengths as well. And the Ferrari trajectory is they had that Spain upgrade in June, created porpoising problems, so they worked through fixing that, a little tweak in Hungary, and then we got to Monza, they had the new floor. And they didn't know whether the new floor had definitely solved the porpoising problem. They thought it had, but they kept saying, we go to Austin. That will be the one that judges it. They also had a new front wing in Singapore, a bit more front load. Then in Austin, where they also had not a declared new front wing, but a new front wing with slightly different structures, a little bit more flexibility. Fred Vasseur had said, I think in Singapore, that with the FIA saying what Mercedes and McLaren were doing was okay, they had to go that way. So they had these elements. And then you went to COTA, which is a broad test of car in terms of the corner speed ranges, and the Ferrari was very good. So that was kind of, they sorted their problems. They were a little bit off in the high speed, as we talked about, mega around the rest of the lap, and then Mexico, similar kind of story. And Mexico's a funny one because it's maximum downforce configuration, but it's actually really low downforce. So Ferrari have kind of made the progress that was stuttering in the middle of the season. So it's been coming there, and actually that performance sort of was there for a few races, but we were never sure because the car's good on street circuits, it's good on low downforce. So Austin and Mexico have confirmed that, and really interested to see if they can turn that into a championship. Lito, question from Jeremy Husted. If Max Verstappen holds on to claim the Drivers' Championship, how much of an accomplishment will that prove to be, considering he's been arguably the third fastest car for 2/3 of the season?
Well, I think if he gets it, it's up to him. It's not for the car. Sergio Perez is showing that this car is not what a Red Bull used to be in last season or the one before. He now has the third, sometimes fourth car, and he's still there. And he's still making results good enough, getting results good enough to stay on the first position in the championship. And now you have against him a McLaren with two drivers, a Ferrari with two strong drivers too, and he's still leading with 47 points. And he's not driving the best car. I think it says enough about him.
We've talked before about where this would rank in Max's titles, and I think it would be better, we've said this, better than the last two. You even said it might even be better than 2021, Ed. I think with where the Red Bull is, look, it's obviously, that car's obviously not as bad as sometimes it's looked with Perez, but it's also nowhere near as good as Verstappen's made it look at times. And the fact that they're on this winless run, despite Max being at that level where he's getting everything out of it, it speaks volumes to where that car is. On any given weekend, it will be worse than a McLaren or a Ferrari, and sometimes even a Mercedes, although Red Bull seem to have developed their way back into being in front of Mercedes and in the mix enough of Verstappen's heroics to be like it makes him a qualifying contender and then a podium threat. But he's not really. When was the last time he was an out-and-out victory threat?
Well, other than the COTA Sprint, which was shown to be a bit of an illusion by the way the race pace did. No, it's been a long time. I mean, Austria obviously could have won.
Spa. He would have won at Spa. He would have won at Spa without the grid penalty. So not this side of the summer break.
Yeah, exactly. It's been, I think it's been a remarkable season from Max Verstappen. Scott, a question from Andy Sally. Do you think the McLarens are too gentle on their tyres? To me, it seems like the McLarens are slower at the start of a race or stint, and they get faster towards the end. You're pondering.
I am. I'm trying to work out if I have a bit of information or a handy quote to support that. Well,
Andrea Stella did talk about it on Sunday night, didn't he?
Didn't he? That's what I was just trying to...
And of course, we've got to remember here, we're talking in relative terms. It's not literally the car's faster on used tyres. And we've seen this quite a long time through the season, haven't we? Think back to Spain and Imola. So that's been there in the McLaren ever since it kind of got to being a proper front runner with that Miami upgrade.
I would say that basically McLaren's argument for the last couple of months, really, and this is kind of what I was searching for in my mind, is that they haven't had the outright fastest car. Certainly not at every track. There have been some race weekends where they have. What I think that car is, I think it's the best all-round car of the others. So when you get into qualifying, where you have the soft tyres on, you have the fuel taken out of it, you have drivers like Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc driving the Red Bull and Ferraris, it's anyone's game in qualifying. It's so closely matched. And a race situation, a stint, and then a full Grand Prix, that's where like weaknesses in cars come out a little bit more. So I'd argue that maybe the McLaren is just, its strength is in that all-rounderness of it. So it's able to be stronger on a Sunday or look stronger on a Sunday than maybe it looks on Saturday. Maybe that's because the others are overachieving fractionally on Saturdays, because the Ferrari is not a qualifying car. The work that's gone in there has been on Sunday. That is a car that is set up to be at its best on Sunday. So it's not like the old situation where it's okay because the Ferrari is the best on Saturdays and this team is the best on Sunday. It's not quite as simple as that. But it suggests to me that the McLaren is just fractionally better. Obviously, it will be circuit specific and track specific. Andrea Stella, I think, did say in Mexico that the cooler conditions was slightly more favourable to McLaren, for example. So and it's so closely matched at the front. Can't emphasise this enough. Those small details do make a difference.
And it's worth noting that it depends on what track it is in terms of which axle it is, because we've seen times where McLaren, like Monza, for example, they struggled with the front. So normally, more often than not, it's the rears that are the key, and the McLaren's pretty good on them. But when it's the fronts, that changes things. And it's interesting. I think if you just look globally over the season, and things have changed a lot, I think McLaren's kind of in the middle, in that the Red Bull has been not so brilliant. It's decent on its tyres in the race, but not quite as good. And you've got the McLaren in the middle, and then you've got the Ferrari, which is the sort of Sunday one, and then Saturday's always going to be difficult because they can't fire the tyres. I think McLaren's in about the right place when it comes to that, to be honest. Question I'll take first, but everyone's going to have a go at this, from Richard Randall. Who wins the Constructors' Championship now? That's a really difficult question. I think I'd have to say McLaren, but it's kind of 45-55 or 60-40 over Ferrari. It's not going to be Red Bull, but McLaren, they do have 29 points, although at the closing rate Ferrari's had, that'll go very, very quickly. But they've got two drivers who can deliver well, even though Piastri didn't do so well in Mexico. And it's a good, strong, all-round car, but it's going to be really close. So if I had to put money on it, I would say McLaren, but I probably wouldn't be stupid enough to bet on that. What do you think, Scott? Who's going to win it?
With the advantage that McLaren has, I would lean McLaren. Plus, I did say when they finally took the lead properly from Red Bull, I didn't see any reason they'd relinquish it. I didn't anticipate the Ferrari challenge being that strong and the point swing being as big as it's been the last couple of events. But I'm going to stick to my guns on McLaren because I don't see the rate at which Ferrari's been able to gain the last two weekends being sustainable. I think that is down to circumstance. I think Piastri will be back on good form at several races, not just one or two before the end of the season. So I think McLaren, they're in a good position, and they've still got at least as good a car as Ferrari and two very good drivers. So they should be McLaren.
Do you want to give Ferrari some hope? Lito Cavalcanti definitely is a name that has some Italian origin, surely.
Yes, but I have reasons to think that Ferrari is in a stronger position because Ferrari has two seasoned drivers. Two, as you say in English, to save pair of hands. And Oscar Piastri has not been as safe during the races in qualifying as he is in the races. And so if he starts to lose his car, as he lost in Mexico, it was some avoidable mistake. He was he lost his position in Q1 while his teammate was the first in Q1. So he didn't have to go for it the way he did in that Q1. I think that's the only thing that makes Ferrari, for me, who puts Ferrari in a best position. Because car by car, McLaren has the universal car, the all-round car, as Scott said, better than Ferrari. Not that much, but a little better than Ferrari. Better enough to win.
Well, mentioning Piastri fits in quite well because we'll finish off with a few questions about him. And this one for you, Lito, from Sam Douglas. Do you think Oscar Piastri agreeing to support Lando Norris has psychologically led to a drop in form outside of Baku, where he didn't need to support him as Norris was so far back? Obviously, Austin, Mexico, not great weekends for Piastri, but not terrible ones. Piastri was quick in Mexico before that Q1 mistake. Do you think there's anything in that psychological side, or do you think it's just the ups and downs of a season?
I think it's part of growing up. I think that's the experience that he's still lacking for him. And of course, next Q1, he won't go for it as he did in Mexico. But it's an uphill struggle for him. Everything may be depending on him. And of course, he has it in his mind. And sometimes it can be a heavy load.
And as we're finishing with a Piastri flurry, Scott, James Godfrey Moon and Leo Godfrey, an amalgamation question. Why did Piastri struggle in Mexico, and what's the reason for his relatively worse performance for the last few races? Few races, of course. Baku 3 races ago, he did win.
Yes, exactly. Actually, Mexico was all defined by the error in Q1. Obviously, it was, I think I might have said this on the post-race podcast, it was very similar to Norris last year. Made a needless mistake in Q1, started at the back. And this time, Piastri didn't do a perfect job coming through. Andrea Stella suggested he did achieve the maximum, but it felt like the second Haas was there for the taking with an ideal race. And he wasn't assisted by a safety car or something like that. So it was always a little bit limited in where he could get back to. He seemed all right through practice, and certainly after qualifying, he didn't have the air of a driver who was feeling like he was properly on the back foot. It just felt very much like I'd have been through Q1 easily without that mistake. He'd have qualified on the first 2 or 3 rows, and it would be a different discussion. It doesn't excuse it. It's still an unnecessary error. It's an error that he can't afford to make too often. And broadly speaking, he has to up his game on Saturdays because he hasn't been anywhere near as strong as Norris has in qualifying. But I'm not too worried about it. I don't really think that he's gone. I still don't think he's having the weekends he had like China and Spain in the first part of the season. There's always the risk of a Zandvoort style weekend where he is just second best to Norris throughout. But we should also, I know it's become very popular this year. Lito mentioned social media earlier to just criticise Lando and completely reduce his credentials as a top-line driver and championship challenger. But he is a fantastic driver, Lando, especially in qualifying. And that is a impressive benchmark for Piastri to be up against. He needs to up his game. He needs to do a better job. But I'm not too worried. I think I would still... I don't think there is a fundamental reason behind it. I think he needs to just execute better.
Yeah, just to finish off, a question from Harry related to that I'll take. While Piastri has shown undoubted potential for the first 2 years of his F1 career, are there now questions about the ceiling of his potential? He's had over 40 races now alongside Norris, and his record in qualifying is worse this year than last. Out of those 40 races, while he's performed very solidly, he has rarely shown a clear pace advantage over Norris. Yeah, I don't think anyone's redefining the potential. He is in his second season. You don't get much extra testing. You will see another step next year. And he's got to take that step. If he stays where he is, then no, that is a ceiling on his potential. And I'd like to see the qualifying pace coming a bit more. And if you look at the statistics this year, there's always an interesting metric, which is the number of race laps ahead. And Norris has been ahead 71% of the time this year. Some of that comes from that Hungary bit where he was ahead as an illusion, but still, Norris has been ahead. But you have to remember how good Norris is. He's a brilliant driver. Now, there can be question marks over the wheel-to-wheel side and the robustness, but just his sheer technical ability as a driver, the intelligence, the speed, the feel, the adaptability, that's all fantastic from Norris. So he's an incredible benchmark, I think, Norris. And so it will take a bit of time for Piastri to consistently work up to that. But the story's not complete. We will see that continuing to play out. It's certainly true that there's a suspicion Piastri could have a higher ceiling, but it's always been a could. That's the interesting thing. What do you think, Lito? Would you expect to see Piastri take another step next year?
I'm sure he will. He's in a position in the team now that he has been told, look, your teammate is fighting for the championship. Please help us. It takes a little of the, of the rage, the way he goes for it. It came right after he passed Lando in the first lap in Monza in a highly risky maneuver. But that's not his style, to drive that way. And I think it may be one of the reasons he's not being the Oscar Piastri he was before. But I'm really, really sure, and I see in him the potential to be a world champion.
Yeah, and I think most would agree on that. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play out. Well, thanks to everyone for the questions. We did have more we were going to try and get through, but it's been a really interesting conversation. So we will come back to more of those questions later on. We've got a couple of week gap after the Brazilian Grand Prix. So thanks very much to Scott and also to Lito Cavalcanti. And if you'd like to see some of Lito's work for the race, just have a look at the YouTube channel. If you're a Portuguese speaker, then you will be able to enjoy it. Or if you don't speak Portuguese, you can listen to the very nice intonation. It's a very nice sounding language.
Just chuck some closed captions on.
Exactly.
Just enjoy the experience.
But Brazilian Portuguese does sound very good. It's not the same as Portuguese. It's got a very distinct sound. So you can just enjoy that if you like. Anyway, we're going to be heading to Interlagos very soon. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.